Welcome to another edition of the Steeple Report. Today we're going to be speaking with Bob Chauncy from the Church Security Institute, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the history and the issues facing churches in terms of safety and violence that can occur at churches, and the measures that churches need to take to keep themselves, including the staff as well as the congregants, safe in a world where safety is something we have to be very aware of. So I welcome you, Bob.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it and welcome this opportunity to share a little bit about what my ministry does. Church Security Institute is a ministry. It's not a business.
Right.
My dad was a preacher, and I never wanted to be a preacher. I wanted to be a policeman. God had a sense of humor, and he's let me do both of sorts. Starting out in law enforcement as a police officer, and then after the Bible talks about a season of 7 years, and I guess I was a slow learner on one or two parts of it. It took me 8 years to make my season complete, but I did roughly 7-8 years with police department, and I started my own private police patrol service, Safety Arms, and we did both residential, commercial, got into a lot with government, doing all of the city of Virginia Beach, schools, buildings, did the hotels at the ocean front, did the city of Norfolk parking garage scope and some of that, Chrysler Hall, and in a lot of apartment complexes providing services, served a couple of churches. After doing that, I got into alarms and some of that, but I got into ministry in a backward sort of way. I had sold my business. It just got to be too big with 150 people and a pretty heavy payroll back when the interest rates were really high. And I decided that it wasn't worth it. I had a young family and I wanted to spend more time with them. And so after about 8 years, I sold the security service, and I went with a couple of national companies. After working for yourself, it was a little bit harder to go to work for somebody else that was pretty set in how they wanted to do things. But I spent a year or two with them, with each one, and then God kind of called me back into it. One of my clients had a Christian singles introduction service, and I'd gotten to know them, and they wanted to sell about the same time that my company was going to sell out. And so I decided to leave and make a switch, and I took over the Christian singles. I did that for 8 years until I met Janet, and we married. And it wasn't as much fun running a single service when you were married, and it was a lot of changes. But during my time with the Christian singles, one of my members was a police chaplain at the beach, and he talked me into thinking about that. And when I went to my pastor at the time, he said, Bob, he said, you've got a unique background and it would be perfect for this. He said, your dad was a preacher, but you were a policeman. And he said, God still kept you in his plan, and now you've got a chance to serve in a unique way, because most police chaplains have never been a police officer, and so you'll know both sides of that badge and both sides of the needs to serve. We serve the officers, but we also serve the public, and provided a number of different services. I did that for 10 years at the beach, and while I was doing it, right after, in fact, I started at the beach, the sheriff in Portsmouth, who I'd grown up with, he ran into me at a funeral, and we talked, and he said, Bob, I need a chaplain. Why don't you come and do this? And I said, well, I'm not a resident of Portsmouth anymore. And he laughed. He said, oh, it's politics. That doesn't make any difference. He said, I need a chaplain. In fact, he said, you were grandfather as a police officer. You could be my deputy. And so I went to be his chaplain and ended up for 12 years being also a deputy, sworn deputy sheriff with the full arrest powers. But it gave me a chance to serve God and serve my fellow man and do some things. I also began to see that I had some training skills, gifts that I could use to serve his church and his people. And just as you mentioned, not only do you serve the ministry, but you serve the staff, the pastor, you serve the members and the visitors, people that come to a church for many different reasons, but they don't know the Lord. And the Bible says the pastor is a shepherd, and it's his job to serve his flock, to provide for them and protect them. And a shepherd needs sheepdog, because the sheepdog will do a lot of the work the pastor doesn't have time to do. And so I've formed Church Security Institute as a way to give back to the Lord and to his church and his people. Safety is so important. In fact, I like to start with a safety team concept. Many churches will have off-duty members of their church or something, and they think they're secured because they've got a policeman. One church had an FBI agent, and they just felt that FBI agent made everything secure. And I laughed one day and I said, Pastor, I said, if you really want somebody that's going to be a better shot, you want the DEA or the Secret Service. I said, but a person in the middle of your congregation is not going to be in the place that they can really serve quickly and most efficiently to prevent a problem.
It's interesting.
Active shooter going on today, and see that as a need. But the basic needs in a church are more in areas like embezzlement, child abuse, sex abuse, safety.
It's interesting, Bob, that you know, I looked at some statistics, and one of the statistics that jumped out at me that you just touched on, that were some statistics that came from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency. It's a government agency that oversees this, and you know, you touched on the mental illness, and you know, their stats show that from 2015 to 2019, 28% of the incidences, which 37 instances and 64 deaths, 28% were committed by somebody that, you know, they directly linked to having mental health issues.
Yes, and it's one of the areas that's hard to know and to do something about. You know, people say, well, we did a background check and we didn't find anything wrong, so it must be a good person. But until they've committed a crime and been caught for that crime, arrested and charged, convicted, there'll be nothing on the record. A person may have mental health issues. They may have never sought or received mental health therapy. And in some cases, the need for medication for some illnesses, schizoid and some other behavioral problems. Those people are really not fully responsible for what they do. Another problem we see in the church is twofold. One is the person that's religiously overstimulated. Maybe they get so emotional about the faith, they want to go up and tell the pastor that God has a message for him, and they're the prophet to come and bring that message to him. Well, you just can't do that and interrupt a church service. And the other is the civil unrest that goes on today. People that are not Christian, they are not believers, and they have no interest in coming to church to worship. They come to disrupt, and the disruption of service can be one of the most dangerous, because in some cases they'll come in as a visitor. They're very quiet, very respectful until some point during the service, and they get up and they create their protests. Others will start protesting outside. They try to keep members and visitors out of the church. And those people, you've got to stop them. You've got to be in a position where you're ready to act or to react. And that's what I try to show a church. They need a risk review to see what some of their risks are, and then develop a plan and policies on dealing with that. You know, a church is a private facility. It's open to the public, but it is also private property. And the church has a right to tell someone that if they don't behave, if they don't follow rules, then, you know, they're not welcome. If they're trying to disrupt the service, if they're trying to create a problem, then they can be told they're trespassing, and if they're trespassing, they must leave or they can be arrested. You need to have this in advance. A church needs to have their, I prefer to use the term safety team initially. And a safety team also can do security, or you may have a second team that is your security. The safety team can include ushers, deacons, some lay people in the church. It can be some off-duty officers or people that have a background in the military or in private security. Some churches will hire an off-duty officer or two or three to provide traffic control for the streets around the church and to provide security in the parking lot as well as in the building. So each church is going to be different. Some can't afford to hire, and therefore using their members is the best way to go. But you need that plan, and you need to be ready to act. In the case of trespassing, we encourage the authority leaders in the church, and maybe the pastor, maybe the elders, to have a letter ready that covers trespassing, and it can be given to the person when they're told not to trespass. You can't be nice about it and just say, no, you can't stay, you have to go. You have to tell them in specific words, you are trespassing, you must leave. If you refuse to leave, you will be arrested.
I
That
think
legal
I think
authority.
probably some churches, wouldn't you say that some churches, in an effort to be a welcoming church, may inadvertently let their guard down as they're welcoming people to, say, a Sunday service, and if they are not prepared with the right personnel, I mean, if you're talking about, somebody coming in to do something violent, your average church attendee is not going to be the person to stop them. So special training probably is really important.
Yes, it is. And you mentioned a good point that a member of the church, somebody in there may have a concealed weapon permit. They may be legally, able to carry. And just because they have a permit and because they carry doesn't mean that they're trained and qualified to use that firearm, and especially to use it in something in a crowded sanctuary. In Texas, almost a year and a half ago, there was a shooting, and it's a good example that I use of that old thing about when seconds count and help is minutes away. This Texas church, a man had come in with a long overcoat, and unknown to anyone at the time, under that overcoat, he had a shotgun. He got up a couple times during the service, went out of the room, went to the bathroom. And to me, that's where a trained safety team would have gone with him, would have kind of gotten a little closer to him, probably found out that he was a little unusual, probably had some mental issues or some anger issues anyway, and perhaps been able to prevent a problem. But they didn't. He came back in the service, he pulled the shotgun out from under his coat, and he shot an usher. One of the safety team members went to draw his gun, and when he did, the attacker shot and killed him. 2 people were dead in less than 20 seconds. Another member of the safety team, who was very well trained and qualified, he fired 1 shot and killed the attacker, all of it happening within less than 1 minute. Now, the police response was quick, but it was 5 minutes before the police got there. With 220, 250 people in a church, how many more people could that attacker have killed in that 4 minutes, 5 minutes before the police got there? It's hard to say, but it would probably be many more. Sadly, there were 2 dead from the church membership, and then there was 1 dead intruder. But those 3 were certainly better than 30 or 50 or more. There have been churches where 25, 35 people have been killed by an attacker, and mental illness is a big part of it. Sadly, there was no training, there was no plan.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if somebody in the middle of the church membership jumps up with a gun, if there's an off-duty officer who doesn't know that person, or if one of the safety team doesn't know that that person carries, innocent people could be wounded or killed in a situation that could be completely avoided if it's left up to a trained team. And this is what we try to offer. And I'm a member of one national group and one local. The Faith-Based Safety Security Coalition here in Hampton Roads provides some free training. We provide seminars. You've been at one, I believe, I remember. And so we try to help the churches
Actually,
at
I
no
think I've been
cost
to
or a very
two.
minor cost. The national group, the Faith-Based Security Network, is now in over 40 states with over 500 members. And they provide training and programs to help a church be prepared. You know, the Bible says that the shepherd should provide for and protect the flock. Well, if he's going to do that, he, again, probably can't do it all himself. And so we have training materials, we have seminars and events. This pandemic has hurt because for about a year and a half now, we have not been able to do as much, but that's coming back. And hopefully in May, we'll be able to start back with some training. People can contact us at churchsecurityinstitute@gmail.com. 3 words, no spaces, churchsecurityinstitute@gmail.com. I'll be glad to send them some free information or give them info on training materials and come out and do a risk review. I don't charge anything. Again, I'm a ministry. And speaking of ministry, you know, Richard, you do it. And one of the things I like about the Steeple Report is that you are sharing information and doing what you can to serve him and to serve his people. We try to do the same thing. We try to help the church, and through these events and this training, we believe that we are serving him in a unique way, and we want to do that. So I do the risk review as a way to help the church see what they need to do. I think there are 4 important, I call it the D's. The death is one thing that the Bible, at Easter, we commemorate Christ's death and his resurrection, his coming back to give us eternal life and salvation. But the D's in the church, as far as a safety plan, are number 1, to deter a problem. Having somebody in the parking lot as a greeter and safety person wearing a traffic vest. The intruder that sees that doesn't know, is that a police officer off duty? Is that somebody that is armed? They just know that there is a watch person that's there, and they may pick another place because they don't want to be caught doing something wrong. The deterrence is very important. And if you can't deter a problem, then you want to detect that problem. And if you detect it, then you can delay the problem ever getting to the church. You start on the perimeter, that's the outer limits, and that's where you can keep a problem outside of the church doors. Another thing, and pastors don't like to do this, but we encourage churches that when the service starts, you lock most all of the doors, and any door that's going to be unlocked has someone there to monitor that door, to let in someone that's authorized or that's there for the right reason, to keep out anybody that's an intruder that's coming to cause harm, to do damage.
What's interesting? What's
On
interesting?
the radio, they can alert that person on the door to lock the door and don't let that person in. By delaying that problem, you've deterred it, detected it, now you've delayed it. You're providing time to be able to defend the pastor, the staff, the members, and the guests that are inside.
You had mentioned about deterrence, and it led me to think about that. One of the statistics I read about really is not necessarily about, say, an active shooter while people are in the church, but one of the statistics that is shown is that I think it's 35% of the violence against a house of worship are bombing or arson, which typically happen when people are not in the church necessarily. So going back to your background in electronic surveillance, there's a lot of technology now that can detect when somebody is on the property with motion detection, and that can alert that something might be going on the church grounds, even if nobody's there.
Exactly. And this is one of the most important parts. Excuse me. yes, if the church is closed, then it is an open invitation almost for some. There have been 2 or 3 incidents where one up out it wasn't in Virginia, it was out of state, but a person that had committed a crime, the police were looking for him. He got into a church. We don't know if the door was accidentally left unlocked. That happens way too often, but we encourage, in fact, the safety team before they leave the building after everybody's out to go around and make sure all of the doors are locked, just as their patrol during the service goes around to the doors and make sure that everything's locked unless it's monitored. But this criminal got into the church and hid. The next morning, the pastor came in, and as the pastor came into the church, the intruder had a confrontation with him. The pastor pulled a pistol that he carried for his personal protection and self-defense. The intruder got the pistol away from, shot and killed the pastor, and wounded one more person in the church before the police were able to get there. They were still in the neighborhood looking for this guy, and they were able to capture him. But it could all have been avoided by, just as you say, in the old days, we used the alarm system with motion detection inside. You couldn't do it outside because of problems. Technology has changed, and I sure wish I had it back many years ago. We suggest cameras on the outside first, and those cameras become a motion detector. And I've worked with a couple of companies now that I have a program called the Shepherd's Key, and it eliminates keys for church doors where, the pastor and the staff think that only a few people have a key. But sadly, we're Christians, we trust our brothers and sisters. And when you put a new lock on a door, before you know it, there are extra keys that are made, and too many people have a key and get in, maybe for good intentions, maybe not for good intentions. But a card access, a key fob, all of those can be identified, and they can determine when and who comes into the church. And if it's at an unauthorized time, it could prevent them from coming in. Another thing that churches have are outside groups that come, AA or Narcotics Anonymous, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. There are other groups that get access to the church, and they may have a key, and they can come on Tuesday night or Monday night or Saturday morning, but they shouldn't be there any other times. Well, if they've got a key, they can come anytime they want. So the Shepherd's Key is an access control, great for small churches that have no budget or very few dollars to spend. And we can put access on one main door, and to get into the church, you have to use that door. And a person that has access on Saturday morning can't come in on Friday night or can't come in on Wednesday night. They're limited in when they can come in. And if they try to come at another time, there's a record, and the church will know they tried to enter when they shouldn't, and they can lock that key out of the system. Very inexpensive, not a lot of down payment or any of that. We're happy to talk to churches about getting that through a local company.
Yeah, I had, as you know, I spent some time in security and specifically in the electronic security side. And so, yeah, I wholeheartedly endorse what you're saying about access control, because not only does it help you to identify who and when, but it also can, like you said, block access to particular people at certain times and grant access at particular times.
Right.
The other thing that I'm a big proponent of, and I'll give you an example. I worked with a church that typically during the week, the pastor might be in and out, but the church secretary was there most weekdays by herself, and she didn't have a direct view of the doors, so they remained locked as they should. What we also did was, at this one access door, we put in not only access control so she could buzz them in or they could have access with a card, but also it had a camera installed so that she could see who was at the door, so she's not blindly letting somebody in. she could see it, and it would be recorded automatically.
Right.
So there's so much great technology out there that could be of real assistance. But I really want to support what you said about access control being very important.
Right. In fact, we use an intercom system now for just that situation. There have been too many attacks, personal attacks, rapes, things that have happened when, yes, only one or two, usually women, are in the church by themselves, and either they leave doors unlocked so people can come and go. Pastors hated to lock doors, but you've got to lock sometimes to be safe. And so with an intercom, it has a camera that can see who's at the door. They push the buzzer. You can talk to them. You can tell them if they're coming to see the pastor, they'll have to have an appointment. You can give them that appointment, tell them to come back at another time. Or if it's somebody that and it's authorized, you push the button and you let them in. So that's the first way of using a very small, inexpensive system to let somebody in. The other thing with the outside, there have been some attacks that were not related to the church or the church service, but it was somebody that just happened to be going by, or in a couple of cases, there were drug deals going on in the parking lot, and someone was killed in a bad deal that went awry. So I suggest the cameras on the outside. Locally, we've had several churches who have buses or vans, and they have been hit, the catalytic converters stolen off of them. That's an expensive replacement item. And sometimes for a church, there's not money to spend a couple thousand to replace a couple of converters. So a camera outside is great. That's better than just having evidence if something happens. If you can get an alert and see and know right then what's going on, and just as you said, be able to talk to that person and say, hey, you in the red shirt in the blue pickup, this is security and the police are on the way. That's going to save that theft. That's going to prevent an arson. It will prevent vandalism, graffiti, or drug deals going on in the parking lot. Things that happen that you just don't expect because nobody's there to see it or to know it until the next day. We have monitoring services that will monitor that alert and take action when you can't do it. Now, today, again, with technology, your smartphone can send you an alert at 2 o'clock in the morning that there's somebody driving around the church parking lot or at the front door to the church. But most church members and most pastors and staff don't want to be awoke at 3 o'clock in the morning and nothing they can do about it. So we feel that a monitoring service, monitoring the exterior, will prevent losses outside, attacks outside, and will also protect somebody getting in, doing a break-in, and then doing damage inside. Break-ins in churches usually occur on several electronic type devices. They'll steal the music equipment, they'll steal computers, laptops, and they'll take recording equipment. Audio visual is very expensive for a church to have to replace. We work with the church insurance companies. Two of the events that I had.
Besides that, besides theft and violence, to give you another little story, there was a town in New Jersey, and there were, within one single morning, there was a lot of destruction done to their outside signs, their signage, that was out on their lawns. And so it raised a lot of red flags that maybe it was a racial hate crime. And so it really mobilized a lot of people to be on guard. And what it actually turned out to be was that it was an African-American gentleman with some mental health issues, and he felt as if when he approached one or two of these churches, he wasn't getting what he thought was satisfactory support or help. Mm-hmm. And so, in a diminished mental state, he went out and started doing damage to all these church signs. That's the way he allowed his frustration out. And it was only because one of the churches had exterior cameras that they were able to identify him And it wasn't a matter of pressing charges. They actually were able to then get him help because he was having a manic, a mental health problem, and he needed help rather than punishment. So security and cameras and things like that, we think of it sometimes purely as security, but it could also have other benefits like this, where you're helping somebody who's having a mental health issue or what have you.
Right. Yeah. And, one of the things that I try to mention and make sure that the safety teams remember and know is that it is a ministry. If somebody doesn't know the Lord, it is just as important to bring them into an awareness of Jesus and what he has done for them and will do for them. That ministry outreach is an important part of a safety team. And if we can help someone, that's important. But, the evidence and being able to identify and help them later, or prosecute, have them arrested and deal with that, that's after the fact, and the loss is still there. The cost is there. Many churches will have a prayer garden, and that's something that people will get in and destroy. Or statues, they're pulling statues down for racial reasons, but there are some places where they pull down or damage statues of Christ or the Virgin Mary or Columbus. That damage can be prevented if you get that alert. And it can alert the church staff, the facilities person, the safety team, the pastor, the deacons, or the elders, but it can also alert security of the police. And if they can see what's going on, and you can talk to that person and tell them, hey, just deal with it on a verbal basis. Sometimes you can prevent that loss. You can also sound a siren. In a rural type area, there are deer that come into the parking lot and around the church, or it could be big dogs. It could be somebody that's lost, and maybe they had a flat tire and they pulled the car up close to the church. So hopefully it wouldn't be damaged until they could come back. A lot of things can happen. And if you know about it, you can do something about it. And if you can prevent the loss, that's the big thing. So the ministry of helping. Yeah, one of the things on a church disruption of a service that I try to teach, you want to first try to get that person out of disturbing the service. And you can talk to them gently and tell them, let's go in the other room and let's pray about this. If they're a religious person, they're going to do that. They want prayer, perhaps. If they are not a religious person and they just want to disrupt, 2 or 3 safety team members can use some techniques of encouragement and persuasion. Remove that person from the church. You may have seen there have been 2 incidents recorded and used in the news. One was in New York, and a priest was literally attacked in the middle of his prayers by a person that came right up on the pulpit, and coming quickly behind him with 2 or 3 police officers who were there because there was a ceremony or something that was going on. Well, they were too late to stop him. He knocked the priest out, I think broke his jaw, someone said. They finally arrested him and took him out, but the damage was already done. Another one was a TV evangelist who had a man come right up on the stage. Now, this evangelist had his own personal VIP, very important person, protection team, and they were off to the side. And it's obvious as you look at him, as this man is coming up and talking, that he looks over to security, and security didn't do anything. I did a brief training with a church here locally where off-duty officer was on the team, and he and another team member were sitting together in the service. And one of the members got up and walked to the front talking to the pastor. They didn't do anything about it because they knew he was a member, and they said, well, he's a good guy, he's okay. Well, he still shouldn't have gone up and tried to interrupt the pastor to tell him something, during the service. Now, when they finally realized something was wrong and they went up and got him, they did just as they did in that one with the police officers getting the subject and in the evangelist. Once the security team got up there and got control, they took him right back out the center aisle through all of the members of the church being, in observance. And there are side back doors at most pulpit areas that you want to get that person out of sight, out of the room, not take them back through the middle where they could possibly pull a weapon or do something else and cause further injury, damage, or disruption. Again, it comes back to being prepared, having a plan, knowing what to do, and getting it done. I started to mention that liability is another important factor, both for the church and for the safety team, because they are personally going to be responsible for something they do. And the church insurance is going to consider the church the primary insured, and they may protect the church from a lawsuit, but they may not do as much with the team members who are acting as individuals. So we encourage churches to look at the liability and look at ways of reducing your liability. There is an insurance program that will add the team under the church's insurance policy, or we, for one or more reasons, encourage the team members to carry their own personal policy that's going to protect them, that will pay for a bail bond, that will cover the cost of an attorney to represent them in a criminal matter or in a civil matter, and that will insure them for damages that they could be found guilty for.
I think that's probably great advice, because I think, many churches, even those that may have limited budgets, think that they can cut corners. But the liability issue that you bring up is really a big consideration that church, because, if a church, if a member of the church acting alone, as you said, as an individual, and there's no insurance to cover them, if there's been, maybe inadequate training, the liability potential there is enormous. That could bankrupt any church easily.
Yeah, we just saw it in Brooklyn City or Brooklyn Center outside of Minneapolis, where, the officer did something that is terrible, and whether it was an accidental incident she got confused in the process, either way, a gentleman was killed. She has lost her job. She resigned, and today she was arrested for second-degree manslaughter. Probably never had any intention of harming anyone. She thought she pulled her taser and she pulled her service weapon. Who knows? And the court will have to decide. Safety team members think that because they're serving the church, they're going to be protected. For as little as $15, $20, $25, the team can be added to the church's insurance. A very small amount that's going to give a lot of help to the team members as well as to the church. The personal policies that we recommend, because they go and cover even more, and they cover the volunteer as a primary insured, not as just a supplemental. They can be as little as $120, $125 roughly. There's some that can be $30, $50 a month. Different policies, different coverages. But, you do something you think is right, even if it's determined criminally you did right, civilly somebody can sue you and get a judgment. That's the way several criminals have gotten away with a conviction, only to be sued civilly and to pay financially a bigger price than maybe they would have paid otherwise.
Yeah, just take O.J. Simpson, one of the biggest cases in the last 25 years. He was acquitted criminally, but the civil suit was enormous.
Wiped him out financially. Yeah. And a civilian that doesn't really think about it when they commit that act. If you put hands on a person, you have arrested them. And if you're not a sworn police officer with arrest authority, there's a real question on, did you do right, even though you thought and for moral and religious and reasonable purposes, you did right. You prevented that attacker from attacking you yourself or attacking somebody else in the church or the pastor or the staff. But, you could lose your job, be arrested, be convicted, and all because you tried to do what was right. And as you say, even if you're not convicted, if the court says, well, no, you were trying to do good and self-defense, and so there's no thing, they sue you civilly and they get a judgment, take your home, take all of your assets, your life savings. You lose even though you were right. So being insured is an important part of being protected and being prepared.
I think probably the most interesting part about discussing these types of things as they surround the church world is, we as God-fearing people, good Christians, we try to exhibit our heart towards other people, so we don't want to be judgmental and all those things that we believe as Christians. Yet there has to be the realization that there's, a world around us that doesn't necessarily play by the rules of good, loving Christian people. There are threats. And when we gather in large groups, there potentially is a target on those groups for people who, for whatever reason, carry malice against Christians or against religion, or just simply are having, mental health issues, and it's a crime of convenience. But, I think the reason I wanted to have you on is because I think that stigma has to be removed against, protection of the church and protection of the people, who are worshiping, because, as a church, you're an organization, you have responsibility for those people and for that building as an organization. So, I think, whatever, to use a term from the 60s, whatever hang up you have about, mixing security and religious faith, I think that needs to be torn down, because there are threats, they're real, and we have to use good judgment and take good steps to protect ourselves and our building and our congregants, etc.
Right. Well, and the Bible says that we should be prepared. Jesus said himself that if you have two cloaks and don't have a sword, you should sell one cloak and get a sword. You know, God, from the Old Testament right on into the New Testament, there were times when you had to do what was right, and that doing what was right required action. The watchman on the wall, the workers were there to build the wall, and while they're busy building, even though they had their sword maybe overlaying to the side, they were busy working, and they didn't think about an attack coming against them. And so the watchmen were there to protect them. That's why I think the safety team is there to protect the pastor. They're there to protect the flock, the lambs, the little ones that are in the nursery or in the children's department. They need protection, and they sadly need protection from some of the workers in the church. There have been pastors both here in our area and around the country that have been arrested as a child abuser, sex abuser, a pedophile, a pornography. I had one example of a church, and the first church was in Charleston, and the man had been a member, had been serving, working with the children for years, and they got a little bit suspicious of activities, had no proof. So instead of saying anything, they moved him and put him into an area with adults, took him away from the children, and he got upset and he left the church over it. Well, a couple of years later, he ended up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there the church had cameras. And in every Sunday school class, there was a camera in a corner that looked at that entire classroom. No bathrooms or no, private personal areas, but it looked at that classroom so that someone would know that they were watching, being watched. Well, the first couple of Sundays, he didn't do anything, and he kind of got the lay of the land. That was mistake number one. A new person in a church should not be given permission to go work with children or even volunteer in any way until most churches, I recommend a year, some maybe more if it's one particular area. Others will do it in 6 months, but get to know something about that new member before you put them in a position of trust. Second or third Sunday, this guy took a ball cap and hung it over the camera just to make sure and see if anybody paid any attention. Well, nobody came to tell him that, hey, you're blocking the camera, you need to take your cap down. So he knew then that they weren't watching the camera. The camera was there just to give an evidentiary, proof of something happening later. Well, he then realized the camera only covered a certain part of the classroom after he took his hat down and noticed it was moved. Well, he moved the camera a teeny bit more. Nobody ever noticed. And then he started to commit his immoral and illegal acts in the corner of the classroom that nobody could see on the camera, even if they watched. Well, once they got a report from a parent of something the child said, they went back and looked at all of this video, saw that the cameras had been covered and then had been moved. Too late to prevent the abuse of the child, too late to do anything other than get rid of the person. They couldn't even file charges because there was no video to show what he did. That's why the camera needs to be monitored. I worked with one local church that they have a person that sits in an office. They watch the whole service, they get to worship, but they're also watching other cameras in the building. And we encourage a church safety team should have at least one person on the outside, one person at the main entry door, and every other door is locked. And if you have to have a side or a back door that's going to be left unlocked, have a third person there. Have a fourth person in the sanctuary at least, a fifth person in the nursery children's area, and a sixth person that walks the halls. Now, some churches will say, we don't have that many people we can get to volunteer. Well, you may have to modify it and combine a couple of those roles. But 6 to 8 people is an ideal team to cover somebody who's sick one day and can't come, or they have to work or something like that. And in a larger church, you need more than that. And even if you've got 6 or 8, you want to rotate them so that everybody gets to worship. That's one of the problems with volunteers sometimes in a church. They're so busy working in the office doing the paperwork for the Sunday school that they never go to attend the service. That's not good. They need to be ministered to and to worship just like everybody else.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on and discussing this important issue for churches. At the end of the video, I will add on your contact information and that of the National Association that you referred to, as well as some statistics that can, be informative for our watchers. But I certainly do appreciate you, Bob. I thank you for coming on to the Steeple Report.